Afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Abby Mars, an educational support coach here with Family Matters Parent Training and Information Center. So, Family Matters, hold on just a second. One of the two parent training and information centers that serves the state of Illinois, and we are funded by the U.S. Department of Education to inform parents of their rights and responsibilities related to special education services, or whom or for children who may be receiving accommodations in school. We are not a legal service agency and cannot provide legal advice or representation. During our 30-minute message today, we will not have time to unmute and take questions, but you can put them in the chat box, and there will be several ways at the end of our presentation in which you can contact our office. You could do this in order to address individual concerns you have related to your child's educational services. A link to the PDF presentation can be found in the chat box, and this webinar is being recorded and will be archived in the Family Matters website. Today, we're going to talk about, it's a 30-minute message on IEPs versus 504 plans. So I know that we're not taking time for questions today, but if you could please put in the chat box if your student or students currently have a 504 plan or an IEP. Just write which one in the chat box. The chat is disabled. That happens every time, and I don't know how to not do that. There we go. Okay, now we can. Try this way. Everybody should be able to have it now. There we go. Now it's working. Thank you, Jamie. My question was, what type of plan does the student that you are currently thinking about in your head right now? So you may have several. You may be a teacher, parent, educational support parent, or I'm sorry, educational surrogate parent. Just think about the student, first one that pops in your head that has a plan and what type of plan they may have. Okay, so we have a pretty even mix here. And the reason we have a pretty even mix here is because both plans provide support for students. They just provide support in different ways. So let's get into it. So first and foremost, Family Matters is an educational helpline. So we take a lot of phone calls from parents, from um, professionals, from grandparents, from anybody really with questions related to special education services and practices within the state of Illinois. So we answer questions. You can call our office, leave a message. One of our educational support coaches will return your phone call. We are also, we hold the grant for the state's educational surrogate parent training portion of their program. So we do that once a month. So if you'd like to know more information about how to become an ESP, please email our office and we'll let you know plenty about that. Our Compass program for the year just wrapped up. Compass stands for Coaching Others and Mentoring Parents About School Services. So we train individuals that are willing to volunteer and attend IEP meeting or 504 meetings with parents, either virtually or in person. So our Compass training for the year just was completed. We had 13 graduates. We're very proud of that. We do an IEP or 504 document review, meaning you can call and schedule a time with us in which we will set up a Zoom and speak with you and go through your child's plan and go over what's working for you, what you think is not working for your student, and back and forth and help you to prepare for a meeting. We also have two self advocates that are contracted through us to provide a vlog. So we have Self Advocacy Rocks by Bridget Brown and Hi, I'm Zoe by Zoe. So we do lots of, just like right now, educational trainings for professionals, parents, students, and we just launched our podcast that I am super, super proud of. So that's kind of what Family Matters is. So today's objectives, we're going to list two basic differences between an IEP and a 504, identify two resources where you can learn more about both an IEP and a 504 plan, and explain a key protection offered by both an IEP and a 504. But it's important to remember that both an IEP and a 504 plan provide formal support for students with disabilities and learning challenges. Every student is different. So the type of plan that works for them is going to be different from even an identical twin. All right. So a 504 plan and an IEP offer support in different ways. So key considerations to remember. Different laws apply to an IEP than a 504. An IEP is the protection for the student is provided under IDEA, or Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, and students with a 504 are protected under Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. Both of those acts moved mountains for individuals with disabilities in America, but students with an IEP are going to be protected under IDEA, and students with a 504 are going to be protected under Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act. And for an IEP, students must qualify to receive it. They must fall within one of the 14 eligibility categories in the state of Illinois, and there would need to be an evaluation process that put them in one of those eligibility categories. That's even if you have an outside diagnosis from a doctor, your school district still needs to evaluate you and place you in one of those categories in order to make a customized, individualized plan for that student. Section 504, a student can have a disability that infers with their learning in the classroom. So with a 504, a school isn't doing any evaluation to determine if you have that disability. They may require a note from your doctor or a psychologist in some way, but or any other professional stating that your student has this disability, but they're not evaluating your student for a 504 plan. Now, a big mix up here, we get a lot of parents and caregivers that are a little confused. They say, well, they did evaluate my student for a 504 plan and an IEP, but they only gave them a 504. This happens sometimes. Sometimes you'll have a meeting and you'll go in and you'll talk about the ways in which your student isn't learning and how their disability is impacting them, and the school will do an evaluation for special education services at that point. So at this point, they're evaluating to see if your student is going to need the support of an IEP. If they would come back that they feel like your student doesn't need the support of an IEP, but they do know that your student is struggling and has a disability, they may then suggest to you, let's talk about putting a 504 plan in place. An IEP is standardized plan required by law. A 504 is a less standardized variation to who participates in the plan and development. So they're different types of plans. We're going to talk about that. So an IEP, again, we've evaluated and we've placed our student in one of those categories, okay? And then an IEP is going to include a present level of functional of performance. We call that PLOP, okay? So it could be a functioning or academic performance in school. So how are their grades? Are they doing their classwork? Functional, how are they socializing with their friends? Can they communicate their needs? They're going to, evaluate your student present levels of function of performance, and then they're going to make educational goals related to their baseline. So if they would test your student for communication and they fall below peer level, then they would make a goal to help your student get to peer level. Those goals could include related services and supports. A related service is like a speech service, a psychological service. So this is minutes that they're giving your student. It could be OT therapy, PT therapy, but most of the time you're going to have an education, or I'm sorry, you're going to have a present level of performance, whether it be functional or academic. You're going to move down there into creating a goals based off if those present levels are below peer level. The goals are put there to measure their students' progress, okay? So to see and make sure that they're making gains or closing that gap. Sometimes the students will have related services associated with where they need support at. That related service will be listed as like who's going to give it, how much it's going to be there, and what supports are needed. Your student will have accommodations and modifications in their plan that will be listed without. We'll talk about how that student will do assessments both in the school and as like a state assessment or, the little fill in the bubble circles is what they used to be called. We'll talk about the placement of your student, how much they will participate in the general education classroom, and then the required roles of the people participating. So in a IEP, when we're having the plan, people sign in at the beginning of the IEP, and then we also identify the role that they carry within that plan. And remember, it's a structured, standardized process with strict enforceable requirements. So if your IEP plan is not being followed correctly, you have options in which to make sure the IEP plan is followed correctly. Or if you have concerns or you feel like your student's not making progress, you can call an IEP meeting and come back to the table and talk about more supports to offer because your student is not making progress towards those goals. So an IEP is going to change what the student learns to their level and provide goals. That's the key there to remember. Now, a 504 plan, it's going to include accommodations, supports, and services that the student may need. It's also going to include names of people and persons who will provide those supports, and then again, name of a person responsible to put a plan into place. So just like the IEP, it's going to provide accommodations. But can anybody put in the chat something that the 504 plan does not provide that the IEP does? So I'm asking the question, what does the IEP provide that the 504 plan does not? Formal minutes of service, residential, yes, we wouldn't, maybe, that's a little different there. A different curriculum or a modified curriculum, very good. One-on-one services, exactly. So goals, thank you, Lindsay, very much. So your 504 plan is not going to have goals for your student. Now, of course, the broad thing that we're thinking here is that a 504 plan, the whole goal is to help your student learn better. We all know that. But an IEP plan is going to list individualized goals and short-term benchmarks to get your student towards those goals. Okay? Where a 504 plan is just going to list accommodations. When I do this curriculum for students and I help them understand their own IEP, which is available through our office if you're interested, um, we play this fun game of what's an accommodation and what's a modification because a 504 plan is not going to modify anything the student's learning. It's just going to provide accommodations. Now, with an IEP plan, a school must communicate with families in writing regarding any changes to that IEP plan that they want to make. So, if they want to take away or give a related service, you have to be notified and you have to give consent. If the change in placement needs to be done, like maybe they want to change your student's placement from general education to resource for a math class, you have to have a meeting and talk about why that needs to happen. Um, with a 504 plan, a school must communicate with families regarding evaluations and changes in service, but it does not need to do that in writing. So, an IEP plan, you're going to get something in writing. You're going to get an email with a letter attached to it, a notice of conference. Maybe you're getting a draft IEP 3 days before the meeting. A 504 plan is different. That could just be a phone call to say, my son, Brian, has a 504 plan, and we just recently changed one of his accommodations. Brian was spending 30 minutes a day in the study hall room to go over assignments. He's doing really, really well, and I think he doesn't need so much direct support there. We're gonna, see about giving him 10 minutes instead of 30. It's just an example. So the accommodation there was providing the teacher was providing support and reviewing Brian's work when he was finished. But now that he's a senior and doing things more independently, she doesn't need to review the work before submitting it. So that's an accommodation that we have listed in a 504 plan. So that was just a phone call between me and the teacher or me and the principal. Whereas if we wanted to do the same thing for my daughter Kira, that would involve changing her placements, taking away a service. We would have to sit down in a meeting and have a conversation, meaning I would have got a letter telling me that we needed to have a meeting and schedule that meeting. We get that? So how does this change the family role in seeking support? And does it change anything? So in the chat box, you can answer this. So if I'm notified in writing about an IEP, does that change my role in the 504 plan? Because I'm not notified in writing. I might just be, getting a phone call or something. So families are still very much active in both plans, okay? But with an IEP, when you get that formal letter, it's because you know that you need to come into the meeting and talk about changing this. With a 504 plan, it's a little less formal. You could absolutely object that the removing the accommodation would not help your student. Um, but again, thank you, Lisa. It's just less formal. So, like we talked about with evaluations, with a 504 plan, a parent or guardian must give permission to evaluate. So, if we're got a 504 plan and things aren't working, the school wants to evaluate, the parent or guardian must give permission. But with an IEP plan, a parent or guardian must give written consent for both the evaluation and provision of services. Does that make sense? So we may kind of evaluate records or look at grades or monitor RTI support with benchmarks and really look at those things for the 504 plan to see what accommodations need to be added there. But I don't have to give written consent. I can just be like verbally speaking. So again, a less formal approach to things. It does not mean that the student isn't protected. Having the 504 plan helps that student to be punished, or I hate the word punished, penalized for things that they can't help. So, an example of that would be not being able to concentrate while we take a test. So, the accommodation might be that we're going to leave the room and have the test read out loud to us in a smaller environment. If the student was not provided that accommodation and his disability of not being able to focus in the room with 24 other students, that's not fair to the student. We're going to level the playing field and let him leave the room to take the test. He's able to do it. He's able to pass. He's not penalized. But if he was to stay there, chances are he could fail the test because he couldn't focus, right? So that's just an example of how accommodations might work in a 504 plan. And could the evaluation used for an IEP and a 504 be the same? I kind of answered that a little bit ago. Sometimes a student will be evaluated to see if they need an IEP, and those evaluations could help support the 504 plan if a student's not awarded an IEP. But with a 504 plan, we're most of the time looking at, academics, we're looking maybe at school reports, like a teacher's made a note or had communication with mom or dad. With an IEP, we're doing, assessments with the student, formal assessments, and we're logging that information. And we're also doing all of the other things, looking at records and looking at communication with mom and all the things there. So, Christine, so if you're asking if you have documentation from a doctor or psychiatrist, the diagnosis, do they have to consider it? So, when developing an IEP plan, if you have an outside evaluation, the school must consider it. They must read it, go through it, and compare it to their own evaluations. With the 504 plan, you're actually going to need that outside evaluation or diagnosis in order to get it's a form of documentation for your disability. So an IEP is reviewed every year, almost to the date that it expires, right? Like they're calling you a month ahead saying your IEP expires in April. We need to have a meeting. A reevaluation is going to occur every 3 years to ensure the child needs to continue to get services or the services don't need to be changed. With a 504 plan, you will sit down once a year and talk about the plan and if it's supportive enough and how the accommodations are working. Um, And a reevaluation, of course, every 3 years to talk about if the plan is still needed. Have we, overcome those barriers? Have enough supports been put in place? But again, it's all about those evaluations and how they look. So let's listen to the short video on the key differences, and I'm going to hope that this works. It never works for me like it's supposed to.
There are many
Okay, I think it's
differences
going to work.
between an IEP and a 504 plan. The first and most fundamental is they're governed by different laws. An IEP is governed by a special education law. 504 is governed under a civil rights law. And that makes a difference in what kinds of services and how an IEP plan and 504 plan come together. To qualify for an IEP, you have to have one of 13 specified conditions or disabilities that are written in the law. For example, specific learning disability, which would be something like dyslexia, would be a condition that a child would qualify for an IEP under. Having one of those 13 identified disabilities isn't enough to make sure your child gets an IEP. Whatever is going on with your child, whatever that disability is, also has to affect his performance in the classroom. And that's really important to know because sometimes parents think that just having a disability qualifies for an IEP, but you also need to make sure that it's making a difference. It has what's called educational impact, adverse impact in the classroom for how your child's learning. For a 504 plan, a child needs to have a disability that is getting in the way of his learning in the general education classroom. The difference isn't that he needs specialized instruction, it's that he needs some changes to get benefit from his education the same way as other kids in that classroom. And so kids who have ADHD often have 504 plans, and what happens is just changes are made to the environment, and those changes are called accommodations. And those changes are made in the general education classroom and don't require specialized instruction. So for example, a child with ADHD may need extra time to work on a test or to get his homework done. So some people are concerned that a 504 plan isn't as good as an IEP. And the truth of the matter is that a 504 plan or an IEP can meet your child's needs. It just depends on how well it's put together. A well written, well implemented plan that everybody knows what's going to be happening and in place and is working on it can be very helpful for a child who doesn't need that specialized instruction. As long as there's a lot of follow through and everybody's checking in to make sure it's working well, a 504 plan can be very helpful for kids in the classroom.
Key takeaways. An IEP is governed by a special education law. A 504 plan is governed by a civil rights law. A 504 plan covers kids with disabilities who don't require specialized instruction.
Okay, and I noticed there are some questions in the chat. We will absolutely get to those questions at the end of the presentation. I will answer those. So the key takeaway there is that with an IEP, we're changing what the student's learning. With a 504 plan, we're just,
You might not want them to have an IEP where they could be
oh,
taken
sorry,
out of the general education classroom or had time taken away for therapy.
sorry about that. So like I was saying, an IEP, it changes what they're learning. A 504 plan accommodates what they're learning. So we're just adding to it. So important questions to consider. Will my child qualify for an IEP under the 14 areas that are determined? I know this is 13. Illinois has an extra qualifying area. They're called developmental delay. We can talk about that more in another presentation. Can a student transition from an IEP to a 504 plan or from a 504 to an IEP plan? That absolutely is yes. They can have a 504 plan first, and then you find out through monitoring that they need more supported plan and at that point would need specialized instruction. Or they can have an IEP and then move down to, or not down to, move to needing a 504 plan after they've met and achieved some of their goals. So, will my child qualify under an IEP under those determined categories? We won't know until we do an evaluation. So, if you know your child has a disability, there's a referral process that can happen with the school if you feel like that disability is impacting their education. So, how does a 504 plan impact student discipline and behavioral support? So, with a 504 plan, you absolutely can talk about if your student is having trouble with discipline and behaviors. Okay, we can add certain accommodations to help with that in the plan. Your student can absolutely still be disciplined within the school. Okay, but if the student is going to be expelled or suspended for longer than 10 days, we do have to sit down and talk about why, make sure that that disability isn't causing the behavior. All right, and then we may need to take extra steps. With an IEP, kind of the same thing. Your student can still be disciplined. The key there is they cannot be expelled. They can have their placement changed, and we'll talk about that again in another presentation. But the school is still responsible for providing them educational services in some way with an IEP. So if your student is suspended for more than 10 days in a school year, or their placement is being changed, meaning we're going to take them from this place and move them here because of a severe behavior, then we have to sit down and talk about that before that happens. So yes, the answer is yes. Your students can, with both plans, can still be disciplined. I get a phone call there a lot that says, I was told my kid couldn't get a detention because he has an IEP. That is not the case. Your child can still be disciplined if they have either type of plan. With an IEP, no matter what the outcome of that discipline is, the school is still responsible for educating your student. With a 504 plan, it may be a little bit different. That's kind of the answer there. And this is one of the questions in the chat. My child is planning to attend college. How will an IEP or 504 plan carry over to support them? This is one of the biggest questions answered incorrectly that I hear all the time, even out of professionals, guys. Okay. So the whole key here to take away, an IEP and a 504 plan are separate types of plans, and they are sanctioned under different types of laws. Section 504 is a federal law that protects people with disabilities. An IEP or I'm sorry, an IDEA is a federal law that protects students with disabilities in education as well. The accommodations from both of those plans can follow your student to college. We have to have a copy of that plan. So I'm very, very much urging you, put this in your mind as your student graduates, get the final copy of either their IEP or 504 plan and keep it forever. Put it with their kindergarten art. I don't care what you do with it, but keep it for your student. Because after 5 years, the school doesn't have to keep that as part of their transcript. So if your student takes a break and wants to go to college later, they will need a copy of that plan to take to student services to receive those accommodations. The accommodations are all about the because, all right? I need extra time to finish the assignment because I got distracted in the classroom. So highlighting that because, and you're going to do the same thing at student services at your college, whether it be community college, trade school, university, and you're going to go to student services, say, I had a 504 plan in school. I need these accommodations here in college. This is why and because, all right? So I am not going to tell you that every college is the same and has to follow every accommodation you had in your plan. I'm not saying that to you. I'm saying that they have to consider and look at the accommodations and see if they're reasonable. Reasonable is the key. If you ask for only eating purple elephant soup for breakfast every day in math class, that's not a reasonable accommodation. We got to highlight that because we got to make sure that we really show that it's affecting our learning. So yes, Sherry, you did actually hear me correctly. Okay, so your transcripts are going to stay with your school forever. Like I could go to my high school and pull my transcript, and I graduated back when dinosaurs were still around. But your 504 plan is only hung on to by your school for 5 years. So you have to keep copies of your 504 plan and your IEP forever. Okay, now there is some legislation out there, like proposed legislation to try to change that, but it is not in effect yet. Okay, so you need to keep a copy of your student's IEP or 504 plan. You need to have it. You need to keep it with you in case your student ever needs to apply for SSI, if they need those accommodations in the workplace or in college or a trade school or a shelter workshop, whatever. You need to keep a copy of that IEP or 504 plan. If you don't have a copy of your student's IEP or 504 plan and it's been longer than 5 years, I would start looking now for different people who may have a copy of it. Okay, so just a little hint there. So, for example, I I'm in graduate school. I'm working on my master's degree, and I did not have a copy of my 504 plan. I graduated in 2002. I hadn't the transcript, but I did not have a copy of my 504 plan. It was really, really hard. I had to make an appointment with student services. Now this is back when I started my associates, but I had to make an appointment with student services. I had to go in and say, this is myself, this is my disability, here's documentation of my disability. These are the accommodations I know worked for me in high school, and I had to highlight that because, okay? So at that point, my college had no record of my 504 plan, but they were great in student services, and my professors were great, and I worked with them, and I got those accommodations that I needed because I highlighted the because. Now, I changed classes every 6 weeks in college. So every 6 weeks, I had to go to my new professor and present the accommodations that I needed, which meant my professor had to decide if those were reasonable or not for his class or her class. All right. Okay, so if you want to learn more, these are some great resources here, especially the Discipline and Rights of Students, IEPs, and 504 plans. It's a great document. So these are some great resources. And I just clicked on it. Sorry. Here's our disclaimer that we are, the PowerPoint that we developed today is funded under the grant from the U.S. Department of Education, but nothing that we do necessarily represents the policies of the U.S. Department of Education. And our project officer is David Immenheiser. So this is me. This is my website. We have a beautiful brand new website, you guys. It's gorgeous, all right? And on this website, we do have a spot for resources. And on the resources, we have one called Plan Development that talks all about 504 plans and IEPs and what the differences are. So that resource is there to you. And again, we just launched our podcast, and we would be absolutely thrilled if you would watch it with us or listen to it with us, whichever one you do. Okay, at this time, I'm going to stop the recording. Thank you for joining us today for our presentation.